Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover and we're really excited. So just to make sure you're all in the right place, this is How to Start an Outdoor Classroom at Your School, Part 1. And we'll be introducing ourselves shortly. But first of all, we have some gratitude to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for making the time. We know that most of you have been teaching today. Maybe you've been out in the field and in the forest, and you could be doing a lot of other things with your evening, but you've chosen to show up and gather here together as a community, which looks like a community across the country and maybe in a few other countries from what I can tell. So I'm just really thankful that you're all here tonight, and know that you'll be able to ask questions towards the end, and just thank you so much for joining us.
So I wanted to start by just introducing ourselves. I'm Natalie Crowley, also known as Nature Natalie when I'm out in the forest. I started my career working in urban public schools with very little outdoor time, very little unstructured time. And as a result, I saw a lot of behavior challenges in my students as well as academic struggles. So I knew something was missing, which led me to ultimately the school I'm at now, which is Presidio Hill School in San Francisco. And it's a wonderful, independent, progressive school that happens to be located right next to the Presidio National Park, which is an amazing resource for us. And my school really values progressive pedagogy, child-centered, inquiry-based curriculum. So I've been really fortunate and been able to go deep with my nature-based work. So 4 years ago when I started the school, I began a Forest Friday program where I take my students out into the Presidio for most of the day, every Friday. And over the course of the first year, I developed a curriculum, which I now have published. I also have written an ebook with Common Core aligned lesson plans for anyone who's interested in doing this kind of work with their students. And I hope to be able to help people at any kind of school, not just independent schools, but public schools, charter schools, home schools as well. And in addition to my teaching, I'm also now a moderator for the NAAWE Early Childhood Environmental Education Group, which is probably how a lot of you found out about this. So that's been wonderful. And I'm also offering consulting services to anyone who's interested in starting a nature program at their school. So that's me.
Great, thanks, Natalie. So my name is Amy Butler, or Amy Coyote, or Miss Coyote. That is my nature name that has stuck with me for the last 10 years. And I think the children that I work with across the public schools really think my last name is Coyote. So when I see them in public, they call me Miss Coyote. And that might give you a clue to some of the culture that we've created in these schools around nature names. And we'll talk more about some of that later. I'm the director of education at a very small nature center in northern Vermont, located in our capital city of Montpelier. Vermont is an extremely rural state, if some of you aren't familiar with that. But regardless of being how rural we are and how much access we have to green spaces, does not mean that children today are connecting to those green spaces. So 10 years ago, I had 2 public school teachers come to me and ask me to help them get their students outside. They had a small amount of grant money, and being that they had been classroom teachers for 20 plus years, they had seen a really big change in student behavior, self-regulation, incoming kindergarten skills. And they felt that it was really a result of not playing and not playing outdoors and being connected to their landscape and their communities. And so that was 10 years ago. And what has come of that is ECO, which is educating children outdoors. Outdoors meaning that anywhere. So this might be along the villages of Vermont. It might be in a more kind of urban setting in Vermont, or it might be in 200 acres behind a school property. So what ECO is it's a standards-based nature immersion program. So the emphasis being on nature immersion, but standards-based, meaning that what we have done with these teachers in central Vermont is that we've created standardized lesson plans to NGSS and Common Core for kindergarten through 6th grade. And that has really been the ticket to get us in the doors and working with public schools, and then getting us back outside. So I'm going to share a lot about that work tonight, and it's not just my work, but it's a collective work amongst probably over 50 teachers in the Central Vermont area. So that's my work here at the Nature Center. We also have a licensed forest preschool that is embedded in our Nature Center. So we kind of have a really great place to practice intensively what we are bringing to the public schools. Our forest preschool at the Nature Center is, well, right now, because we're in the thick of winter, it's not 100% outside, but it's pretty close. So that is another part of the Nature Center here in Vermont. And we wanted to, I want to just take a little bit of time to acknowledge a few things before we take off and start sharing a lot of information with you tonight. One is just acknowledgement to NAAEE for giving us this platform and giving us an opportunity to be able to share information with you tonight. They do a lot of great webinars. Also, Natural Start Alliance is embedded within NAAEE. So if you don't know about Natural Start Alliance, kind of pull through and look them up, because that's a great early childhood resource for nature-based learning. Also, you'll see here the Child Play Institute. That is Paul Roberts, who offers a conference in California, and that's where Natalie and I met. Natalie, when was that? Maybe 3-4 years ago?
I think it was 4 years ago
Yeah,
now.
it might have been 4 years ago. So that's where Natalie and I met. And this is what happens with nature-based learning when you start making friends in nature, is that you keep them and you track along with them. And so I approached Natalie and said, hey, what have you been up to? I've been watching, let's offer something together. I also want to acknowledge John Young's work, Coyote's Guide. I know that's been a big influence in my work and also in Natalie's work as well. In our next webinar, we'll talk more about routines, and also acknowledge all of the teachers, all of the administrators that support this work, and a lot of gratitude towards the children for showing up and coming outside, and for families who support all of this, and the land and the earth as well. We spend a lot of time outside in all these public schools that we work in Vermont, and we have an impact in very small increments on the land. And I just have a lot of gratitude for that and for the support that the landscape is giving all of us.
Yes, and I second all of those appreciations. So just wanted to quickly share our agenda for tonight. So the theme for tonight is part one is going to be about laying the groundwork for nature-based learning. So we were thinking of this as sort of the inside work that you have to do before you're ready to go outdoors. So the 3 little subtopics we'll be touching on are I can teach outdoors, or the why, alliance building, how to garner support from key constituents, and our space and place in nature, finding a natural area to learn outside. And then we will end with some questions and answers at the end.
Great. So the why, that you can teach outdoors, and this is kind of a little bit of a different approach. I think when other webinars, when we are sharing information on how we can do this, people want answers right away of what are the logistics, what do I need to know, what equipment do I need? And what Natalie and I wanted to do was to really dial it back and have it come back to you and think about, where am I at in my teaching practice? Where am I at myself and my life? And why is this important to me? Because this is personal to you, and there's a reason why you're here. It could be the bulleted list of all of the reasons why we need to do this, that children spend 6 to 8 hours a day on a screen, that behaviors and self-regulation and referrals to the office have gone up in your school. It could be that we don't see children playing outside as much anymore. And that research and all of that data is there, but when it comes down to it, this is your own practice. And so what we work on with teachers is to really kind of craft that elevator speech, so to say. And that when you share your story of why you're doing this work, it's personal and it's also inclusive. And by sharing that story, also with the research and with the data of why it's important, it makes it inclusive to others, and it ignites curiosity. It has a really great opportunity to ignite curiosity in your colleagues. So you might have a situation here, like on the left with the photograph of Lisa Garibaldi and Jillian Zylinga. They've been teaching outside together for 5 years, and they have each other for support, and they have great support from their schools. Or you might be like the other photograph on the other side, tending your own fire by yourself and trying to get everybody else on board. So I just want to encourage you to think about, why is this important to you, and to craft that story and start sharing it with other people around you. So this next slide, you'll see a graphic here, and this is something that Ann Stiers from Juniper Hill School in Maine shared with me. And I asked her about this graphic, and she said, oh, it's just an old environmental education kind of graphic. And what I did with it was I took it and turned it into something a little bit more about ourselves than the way that it had been originally shared with us. And you'll see that there's 3 circles, and that first circle is the inside and your comfort zone. You're going to find yourself in any of these 3 circles at any point in time. And that inside space is your classroom space, and maybe it's where you've been and where you've been teaching for a long time, and you've started to think about, wow, I'd like to teach outside. I see that this is a movement that's happening. I see other people doing it, but really I'm comfortable inside. And I'm not quite sure what my why is yet, but I'm thinking about it. The green zone, the outside, we're in the learning zone, is when you have crafted your why this is important to you. You've shared it with colleagues. You've gotten support. You've learned some things. You've attended professional development. You've scaffolded the learning in your classroom, and now you are outside. And it feels good. And then the weather gets really bad, and you go back inside to the yellow area, to the inside zone where it's comfortable, and that's okay. The red zone, what we call the panic zone, is the best way to describe this is you are really excited about this work, but you haven't communicated to people in your community about it, and you dart out the door into the forest with your 15 to 20 students without much planning. And it turns into a panic zone. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this. I experienced this when I first started doing this work. There was a lot to learn, and there was a lot of collaboration with the public school teachers. The panic zone is not a place that you necessarily want to be. And some days you might find yourself there, and you've got to kind of step a little bit more into the green zone. The other great thing about this graphic is that it also shows where other people in your school might be. You might be in the green zone, and you might have a teacher, your next door neighbor teacher, who co-teaches with you, and they're kind of dabbling. They're still standing in the yellow zone, but they want to join you in the green zone. So this is just a graphic for you to carry along and just think about, how do I move in between these areas, and how can I maximize that green space? You'll notice that the yellow space is really small. And I'm sure some of you experience that on a day-to-day basis, that the walls are kind of holding the children a little bit too tightly. The picture too, I just want to quickly comment on the picture. These are 2 teachers that have been working outside together for a long time. And this is a conversation, this is a time that they've had together in the forest during some of the professional development that I offer, where they talk about, what are my edges in this work, and how do I push against those edges, and how do I get support from the rest of my colleagues in my school. So I just shared that graphic with you as something to kind of carry along and consider as you move forward with this work. And I have one more slide in this section, and this is the responsibility of why. So when I started doing this work, the teachers and I were thinking, this is going to benefit the children. They're going to learn science. We're going to have happy and healthy students. And then some really profound things started to happen. We had students who did not talk or share in the classroom, talking and sharing outside. We had students that really struggled with academics and refused to pick up a pencil and a piece of paper and do any kind of journaling inside the classroom, and they chose to do that at their sit spots outside. These were really powerful stories for us, and as other people in the community started to see this, we needed to speak to it and share it with others. And other people will start coming to you when you do this work and ask you for help and ask you how to do this. So I see this as a responsibility. If you look at this slide, really just look at this slide, and there's something about this slide. You'll see someone in this slide that doesn't know your why yet, that's not quite sure why we're all sitting outside in a circle in the snow in the middle of February. And it's the person standing in back drinking their coffee and probably was just checking on their phone. That is also our responsibility as teachers and educators, is to invite those people into the circle and potentially help them soften their edges of how this might feel for them. So just another nugget for you to think about as you step into this work.
Great, thank you, Amy. So our next subtopic is about building alliances. And just a caveat that, you know, this is just a general overview of how you might want to go about doing this. It's certainly not an exhaustive list or resource, but we just kind of wanted to post some things for you to start considering as you're getting started with this work. So, you know, as Amy has said, you can't do this work alone. This is the work of a whole community, a whole school, and it can be challenging to get people on board if they're not as gung-ho about it as you are. So some things to just think about as you're getting started. First of all, what is your school's culture around outdoor exploration and learning? Does anyone else do this? Does your school even offer PE classes outside? What happens when the weather gets cold or rainy or snowy? Are kids allowed to go out for recess? Are teachers comfortable with that? Or does everyone hunker down inside? So knowing a little bit about how your school already approaches outdoor learning and outdoor time will give you a good place to start as you begin engaging others around this work. You also want to think about who will support you at your school in this thinking. So what other teachers, what administrators, which parents can you get on board right from the beginning, and which ones are you going to have to work a little harder at? And if you are going to have to work harder, how are you going to convince them? So not that you have to have answers for this right now, but just things to be thinking about, because you really do want to get as many people on board as possible. And finally, you want to think about what is the history of environmental education in your community, so beyond the walls of your school. Are other schools doing things like this? Are there summer camps that are offered in your community that take kids outdoors? Are there after-school classes? Does the Parks and Rec department offer programs for kids? Are they well-resourced? Things like that. And think about who's already done this, and you may not know that. You may need to do a little digging. And if there are people who have done it, what can you learn from them, and how can they be a partner to you? So for example, as I mentioned, my program takes place in a national park. So we are really lucky to have park rangers who literally, it's their job to come and talk to the kids and work with the children. So they're always really excited to do that. But I didn't know about that. I was actually approached by a parent who happened to have a connection. So I wish I had done a little bit of research ahead of time, but things like that, you know, you'd be surprised how many people are willing and ready to come support you in this work, but you do have to seek them out sometimes. And also knowing, you know, park rangers and things like that can be really helpful for securing permits or permission to use a space, which we'll talk about later. So thinking beyond the walls of your school can be really important. So once you have your great idea of starting a nature-based learning program, the next step is to really get your school's administration on board. And this can be a big challenge. And we've heard from a lot of people that this is a stumbling block for them. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how to do this. My number one piece of advice is do your homework ahead of time and make sure you're prepared before you go to the administration. Have a lot of information and data to share before you even have that meeting. So one way to do that is through writing a proposal. And this can seem really daunting if you've never done something like this before, but having gone through this process myself recently, I can tell you that it's not as bad as you think. It just requires a little bit of research and writing. And I'm going to share with you in a moment an example of a proposal that I worked on this past summer with a parent from a school outside of Baltimore, Maryland. And she's a parent at a public charter school who wanted to start a program for her child's school and just needed some help, you know, figuring out how to do that. So I worked with her over the summer to write this proposal. And it's really long and it's really nitty-gritty detail, but I think it's helpful to see just some of the pieces that you might want to think about and include when you are getting ready to share a proposal or ask permission from your school. So let me click on this and show you really quickly what I'm talking about. So this is the proposal, and I'll just quickly go through the key parts of what we included. You certainly don't need to have all of these, but some of these sections might be useful for you to include. So we started with just a summary of what the program would be, what our proposal was. Then we went into the stakeholders and organization information, who was writing this proposal, who was going to be impacted and involved. Then the situation description is really where we kind of got into the nitty-gritty details. So first identifying what the problem was, and in this case, it was that children are losing their connection to the natural world. Yours could be slightly different. Our kids have too much indoor time, not enough outdoor time, things like that. And then you're going to present your solution, and your solution is your program. So talking about what exactly it's going to be, what the vision is for the program overall, why, and you really want to emphasize the why here. So why this program, why this school, why these students, and most importantly, why now? So what about this particular moment in time makes it so important that this program happen right now? So as you can see, lots and lots of research that we cited here, and that's a key thing. You want to make sure you have data to show that backs up your rationale so that it's not just your opinion, but administrators want to see hard facts. The more objective you can get, the better. And you really want to show them how it's going to support the school as a whole and align with their mission, align with any curriculum goals they have. These things are all important to schools, as they should be. So the more that you can show that this program actually fits really well with what they're already doing, the better. So we included lots of data about specific standards that the students would be addressing in this program. You don't have to do that, but that is definitely one way to get people on board. And then, let's see, continuing on, then we continued with an action plan. So stating what we've already done, what kind of legwork has been done already, and what's going to happen next. And specifically, we focused on kind of plotting out the next year to year and a half, thinking through what exactly we would need to do at each of the next months, how we were going to grow the program, how we were going to train teachers, how we were going to check in and see how it was going, how we're going to evaluate the program, and things of that sort. So we went all the way through fall of 2019. And then next section is about outcomes and impact. So here's where you really get to show how this program is going to positively impact all the students and all the teachers and all the parents and anyone else who's involved. So you can be really specific again about how this is going to support the school. The next section is evaluation, which I think is really critical as well, because schools want to know, how are we going to know if this is working? If they agree to try it out, they're probably going to want to have some sort of check-in at a periodic interval throughout the year or throughout even the months. And so you want to have a plan for how you're going to assess, is this working or not? Is this getting the desired results or not? So, we just even thought about having a short survey that we would administer to parents and teachers and students. Obviously it would look different depending on the age of your students, and how you give that survey might be different, but just some way to collect feedback and have a plan for implementing that feedback as needed. And then of course, schools always want to know, how much is this going to cost? So if there's any potential expenses that you foresee, maybe buying some equipment in the beginning or covering costs for transportation if needed, you're going to want to outline that and give projected costs. You don't have to give the exact amount, but just any sort of idea you can give them about the cost is always helpful, as well as how you're going to get the money for that. So, things like donations or Donors Choose or GoFundMe are great ways. Basically, you don't want to have the school have to pay for it if possible, because that's kind of going to be a downer for them, and they're more likely to say no. And then finally, supplementary materials. So I recommend including a little appendix of any research articles that you cited. You might give them some sample lesson plans, a scope and sequence for the year. Just again, anything you can provide to support why this is going to be such a great program is really helpful. And you basically want to anticipate any objections or questions or concerns that they might have, and try to offer solutions and answers to those questions ahead of time. So that's just one idea for a proposal. And again, that was really a meaty one, but I hope that that was helpful to see kind of some of the things you might want to think about as you're beginning to approach a school. So assuming that you get permission to begin your program, the next step is you're going to need to train your teachers. You know, maybe it's just you in the beginning, but hopefully eventually other teachers will be participating as well. And so we've received some questions about, you know, how do we go about getting other teachers on board? How do we train them? And Amy and I are both really big fan of books, you know, a little bit old fashioned. Of course, there are a million other resources as well. There's conferences, there's websites, there's NAAE, there's webinars, all these things. But at the end of the day, books are actually really great for when you're out in nature because you can take them with you. And we collected a list of some of our personal favorites you'll see here. And, you know, this is definitely not an exhaustive list again, but please do check out some of these if you're interested. And not all of them are geared towards early childhood. So, you know, if you're working with older kids, definitely some of these are still applicable, particularly Coyote's Guide, I would say. And I had to put in a little plug for my own book, Teaching Outside, which again is 20 different Common Core aligned lesson plans for grades really preschool through 5. And those are especially designed for people who have never done this kind of work before, but want to get started. So I give you hopefully everything you need in order to just try one lesson outside. And then from there, it's usually a lot easier to get going. So feel free to check out these books. And if you're looking for something in particular, we have lots of other books that we can recommend as well. So if you don't see something here that seems like the right fit, please reach out to me or Amy and we'll put our contact info at the end and we can recommend some other books as well. All right.
Great. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for sharing that proposal. It is a big piece of work for teachers to do that will go so far and that is being prepared, and it's a great segue into these kind of 3 points here that I have up on the screen. So building knowledge is part of that proposal. Also heard Natalie talk about why are we doing this, and that is the other part that I'd spoken about earlier is what is your why and why is this important? Building knowledge, building alliances, and building resilience. So these kind of 3 phrases all flow into each other. And this comes from Tim Gill's work. He's a play worker and an advocate basically for childhood, for healthy childhood. And he's from the UK. And I think down at the bottom of the screen, I don't know if you can see it, but it says which piece that this comes from. If you go, yeah, no fear, growing up in a risk-averse society. So what I'm going to do is I want to use these 3 pieces to just give you an example of how to get buy-in in your school and how these 3 things flow together. And I'm going to use weather as an example for that. So Natalie, if you can go to the next slide. So building knowledge, and I saw these earth science standards in Natalie's proposal that she wrote up together with the school teacher from that school that was proposing to have this outdoor program. So having NGSS or Common Core standards in your proposal and showing how are we going to meet these standards. So building knowledge in your classroom, this is something that you're going to do before you go outside. You're not just going to step right out the door and go into the forest or go into the field. You're going to be in the panic zone in that red space right away. So the scaffolding and the pre-teaching is all building knowledge in the classroom beforehand. Building knowledge about weather, asking questions to obtain information about weather patterns, preparing for weather. And you're going to see in this picture that these children are all dressed for it's kind of a shoulder season in Vermont. We call it mud season. So it's when the snow starts to melt and all the mud comes out, but it's still really cold out. So they've got rubber boots on, they've got snow pants or rain pants on. Their top halves aren't dressed yet. This is a huge part. This is going to be, if you haven't made it out the door yet for an extended period of time, this is building knowledge in your students. It's also building self-efficacy. It's sequencing. And so getting the children to really understand this is what we need to be outside for a certain amount of time. In the other photograph there are bins for children to sign clothing out. Now this next slide, building alliances, is where am I going to get all that clothing? You might have a lot of students that show up without even their basic needs met, let alone a coat and warm socks and boots. So building alliances is a really, really important part of this work. It also brings people into the school. This is what I've seen over 10 years, is that we have volunteers coming out with students that don't have children in the school anymore, but they want to come out and spend time because they believe so strongly in children spending time outdoors and connecting to nature that they're supporting this program. So building the alliances with families, with elders in your community, the retired people who have retired, obviously your colleagues and coworkers in your school. Natalie had mentioned this, community members with knowledge and skills in the outdoors. You may only be going outside for a short amount of time and want to be building up to the longer amount of time. But one way to do that is by bringing in other people into your classroom to talk about nature, to share skills, and to kind of ignite some curiosity and knowledge of spending time outside. Business owners, it's also who you want to build alliances with. And I put school buddies down there. That's what we call them in Vermont. So we have some great kind of mentoring programs with older students in the school that come and spend time with our younger students. And those are really strong alliances. And we have preschoolers showing sixth graders how to cook bread on a stick over a fire. We have sixth graders who have never done this, but the preschoolers are teaching them how to do that. That's building an alliance within the school. Now in this photograph, you're going to see a father, and he's got a big log over his shoulder, and a whole bunch of other kindergartners are carrying another log. This is an off-duty Marine who had just moved to northern Vermont from South Carolina. And he heard that his son was going to be participating in ECO every single week for 3 hours outdoors, pretty much no matter what the weather is. And he was curious. I personally felt very nervous to have a Marine, I guess, come and visit us. And he jumped right in. As you can see, he built with the children. He came every single week after that first visit and participated for the entire school year. He was also a huge advocate, obviously, for the program, and he helped us get clothing. After the first day with us, he turned to me and he said, spending time in the forest helps humans be responsible and kind to each other. You just said it just like that. So I saw that as this is how we build alliances. So Natalie, if you can go to the next slide.
Actually, just wanted to jump in real quick and share one
Sure.
more thing about this. So at my school, we have a requirement for, a low student-teacher ratio anytime we leave campus. And I think it's one adult to 8 students or something like that. So, it's not enough just for me to go with my class. So we really rely on parent volunteers and family members to come join us. And so that's one way, to build alliances and help with your ratios, because I know that's an issue for a lot of teachers. So don't be afraid to ask parents to join. Not all of them will be able to or comfortable, but you'd be surprised how many are interested in at least checking it out once. And usually if they've come once, they're excited to come back a second time. Sure. Yeah,
and ratios, someone had asked that question in the thread earlier this week, and ratios will come in our second webinar on safety, but really important to have good ratios when you're outside. So this last part of building knowledge, building alliances, and building resilience. So we've built knowledge in the classroom of what is the weather like. And we're doing that not just through a weather chart, but through actually spending time outdoors in nature. We've built alliances with parents and people in our school, and we've gotten the support and the resources that we need for clothing. Now we can go outside and have direct experiences in nature and build resilience. We can build grit, and we can have a growth mindset. So those are words that we're hearing a lot now in education, like grit, growth mindset, and resilience. You can see in these two pictures, this is later in the season. So the picture in the snow we've been working on this since September. So by the time the children are going out in the winter in this type of weather, they do have resilience. They've been out in cold, rainy fall weather. And by the springtime, when the snow starts to melt, in the other picture, these children are, you can see on their faces, these are preschoolers, they're really, really comfortable outside with all their layers on and getting muddy and getting wet. There are still hard days. There are still hard days when you want to go right back into that yellow area. You're like, okay, we've been resilient enough today. We're turning around and we're going to go back inside, and we're going to continue our learning inside so as not to go into the panic zone. Resilience it's just a word that is coming up all the time now. And I think with everything that is happening and pairing with a movement to spend time in nature, nature asks us to be resilient, and in a classroom community, I think it's one of the best places to practice that. You're sending a message collectively to all of your students that we can do this and we're going to do it together. And we might be uncomfortable, but we know how to care for ourselves and we're going to care for each other. And we can learn and have fun at the same time. So build knowledge, build alliance, and build resilience. You can't build resilience until you build knowledge and you build your alliances. So just another kind of tool for you to think about as you get further into this work.
Thanks, Amy. So the last little piece that we want to touch on is our space and place in nature. So now you've got this great idea, you've hopefully gotten the go-ahead from your school, and now it's time to actually decide where you're going to go. And so choosing your outdoor classroom location is a really important decision. But before I even go any further, I want to just note that when I say outdoor classroom, I don't mean you have to have tables and chairs and desks and walls, and you actually should not have these things. It really just means a space to gather and return to on a regular basis in nature. So again, some questions to consider when you're first trying to decide where you're going to take your students. First of all, is it far enough away from your school to be accessible, but still feel like an adventure? You know, somewhere that they're a destination that the children are going to. You don't want it to be somewhere that they go at every recess and they're there all the time. You really want it to be a special sacred place that they look forward to returning to week after week or day after day. You also want to think about who owns the property and who are the neighbors. So, you know, in some cases it might be private property and you might have to do some legwork ahead of time to get permission to access the site. You might have to commit to doing some service work. I know some of the classes at my school, in exchange for using one of the city parks, they have to do several days of community service in the park throughout the year. So you might have some sort of arrangement like that. So just making sure that before you go set up camp in some beautiful natural space, that you actually make sure you know who that space belongs to, who can use it, and what kinds of requirements and things do you need to keep in mind. So you can see in these pictures here, two different examples of walking to our outdoor classrooms. On the left is some kids in Vermont. I don't know, Amy, if you want to share anything more about that picture.
Yeah, so this is one school that has access to 200 acres behind their school, but it's acreage that is owned by the solid waste facility. So it was kind of a trade with the solid waste facility that's in that town and the school and the town itself, that land is designated for town use. It's not a town forest necessarily, but luckily it's backed right up to the school. And so an interesting thing, and I'm sure Natalie has experienced this too, is that what we've seen in all of our schools that we work with in Vermont is an increase in use in public green spaces, or families coming back to the school property on the weekends, where they have never had that before. And I just love this photograph because it is an incredibly steep hill. Like, I'm not laying on the ground taking that photograph. It's so steep. And these kindergartners, some students in that class learned a lot that year about climbing that hill. So that was their kind of favorite route to get up to their forest. They still have quite a ways to go too, but.
And then in contrast, on the right, you can see my class walking. You know, we walk through a neighborhood to get to the entrance to the Presidio that we use. So different, you know, different approaches, and everyone's going to have a different route to get there. And just remember that the journey is part of the experience, just as important as where you end up. So don't forget to savor that part as well. So, you know, unfortunately, not every school is located right next to a beautiful plot of outdoor space that they can use freely. And we really want to recognize that, because that is, I think, the exception to have those spaces. And Amy and I are both really lucky to work in places where we do have such ready access, but we understand that most people do not. So what do you do if you don't have a natural space right near your school? Well, one thing to think about is size and impact. So, you know, you don't have to have a huge space. It doesn't have to be a big wide open meadow and huge forest where kids can run and frolic forever. You know, while those things are great, they are not actually necessary for a really great outdoor experience. It can be a very small amount of space, and you'd be amazed at how many new things the kids will discover every time they return to that space. And it's a great opportunity to really notice changes in the environment. So how does this small space change from one week to the next, from one season to the next? So don't think you have to have a huge spot. You know, small can be just as powerful. And also get creative. You know, I've seen teachers who don't have a park nearby or a forest or anything like that, just use their school garden, you know, or find a little plot of land on their school property. That can also be just as impactful in a very different way, but it's not something that should exclude you from doing this kind of work. So, you know, again, use those creative ideas. And as teachers, we're really good at this kind of thing and coming up with solutions where it seems like there aren't any. So try thinking outside the box if you're feeling stuck about that. Also thinking about access. So, you know, again, not all schools live in walking distance of an outdoor space. And some students, even if it is technically walkable, it might not be walkable for them because maybe they're too young, maybe they have different abilities. So one school in Vermont that Amy knows about, they actually bus students one way to their outdoor space. So the school provides a bus in the morning, the students take to the park or the forest, and then they actually walk back. So this is another creative solution. If it feels like walking both ways would be too much, see if you can get just a bus one way, or maybe you can take public transit one way, or maybe you can get parent drivers, something like that. So there's a lot of different options. It doesn't have to be just that you're walking the whole way. And you'll see in this picture here on the right, this is where the students are walking back to their school at the end, and they're walking through a part of town with no sidewalk. So they use this yellow rope to hold on to, which makes for a really cute picture and just shows you that, you know, there's different adaptations you can make. And this is a really young group of kids with diverse needs. So this is what worked for them. So don't be afraid to do what you need to do to make it happen. And hopefully the location won't be a big barrier to you in doing this work.
I'd like to add too to that, that bus was, paying for that bus was a hurdle, and the PTA, the parents of that community, fundraised for that bus for, 25 trips to the town forest. That was pretty much in the first year, almost right when we started. So by building the knowledge and building the alliances right away in the community, we were able to have parent support to pay for that bus, because that's also another hurdle, is the financial piece, for sure. And that school continues to go out and has the bus drive them one way. The other thing that's great, and I know Natalie experiences this, is in a more urban setting, is to have children walking through the community at the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day, or at the end of the day. That's surface area. That's people in the community seeing children out, not inside a school building or not just on the playground. And if it's happening regularly every single week, there's a great opportunity there to start conversations with people in the community. I know our postmaster here in Montpelier, you know, for the first year was like, where are you kids going? How come every single week I see you going up into Hubbard Park? Well, he became one of our great advocates because both of his boys go to that school, and he was very supportive of the program because he saw children out walking every week up into the city park. So exposure is a good thing.
All right, we're going to try to wrap up in the next 5 minutes, everyone, so that we can have some time for questions at the end. So thanks for hanging in there with us.
Yeah, we'll fight through this. So we're going to talk about safety in webinar number 2, but Natalie and I decided that we could not talk about your space and place in nature without quickly bringing up site assessments. And so I shared these 2 slides with you, just being aware of hazards in the site that you're going to. Now, if you're going to a park, that's communication with park officials. If it's on your own school property or private land that you've worked out an agreement with, it's still our responsibility to be looking for hazards. So hazards are things that children do not notice and cannot see and cannot make decisions about. Those are our responsibilities. So in these 2 photographs, that's a birdhouse that had flipped upside down and there's a wasp's nest in there. And the other one is just what we call a widow maker or a spouse maker or whatever you want to call it. But those are things that need to be removed and taken care of before spending time in a forested area. Here in Vermont with our program, we do those seasonally and we do them after kind of big weather events. We go back to the place that we spend our most amount of time in and we do a site assessment and kind of check things over.
So once you've chosen your spot, you want to make sure that you have a dedicated area for a meeting space or a circle space, just like you do in your classroom. You want to have a place where the group can gather. And this is such an important and special part of your outdoor classroom because this is one of those core routines that you'll keep coming back to again and again. And we'll be talking about this more in the next webinar, but you know, this is where you start your day. This is where you end your day. It's this great place to read a book, teach a mini lesson, have a discussion, have a snack. And by having the same place to go back to each week or however often you're going out, you're creating a routine that's really predictable for the kids and it gives them that sense of safety that is so important for doing this work. In order to take risks, they first have to feel safe. So this is just one of the many ways that you can create that feeling for them. And you'll find that they really, really love being there. I think for my kids, this is just, you know, this is how they know that they've truly arrived at Forest Fridays when we sit down in that circle. And then they know, you know, that we're transitioning out of it when we come back at the end. So it really is a small action that has a big impact on the children. And when you're choosing this space, you want to think about, you know, who was here before us? Who was using this land in the past? And what are we going to do here? And what's the impact going to be in the future? What will happen after we leave? Depending on the site that you have chosen, you know, if it's a public space, then you're going to want to be thinking about leave no trace. So how do we make sure that the next people who visit this space will have, you know, a fresh, clean environment just like we did? If it's someplace that's a little more private that you're going to be returning to again and again, you may be able to leave some things there. So like you'll see on the left, this class has some established little areas and materials that they get to leave there. So that again just depends on what your situation is, but just make sure you're aware of that. And then also in choosing your location, it's fun to think about, you know, what are the children going to do once they're there? And one of the things that Amy and I both feel really strongly about is making sure there are loose parts available for children. So that means sticks, logs, rocks, pebbles, acorns, pine cones, sand, leaves, you know, all of the little pieces of nature that children will find a million things to do with. You want to make sure there's a variety of those available at whatever site you choose. Certainly don't have to have all of the ones that I mentioned, but you know, you want to make sure there's actually things for the children to pick up and touch and get visceral with. It's also great to have opportunities for climbing if you can. Speaking of risky play, so important for kids, and you'll find you will learn so much about your students just by watching them climb a tree or not climb the tree in some cases. Water is always fun to have if you can, but not every site has that available. And then just thinking about the physical material of the earth. Is it sand? Is it rocks? Is it dirt? And what impact does that have on your students? You know, some teachers hate sand because it gets everywhere and it comes back with you to your classroom. Some don't like the mud. So just thinking about what your comfort level is with these different materials and what your students' comfort level will be as well.
So, and here's kind of our loose parts or our affordances in Vermont. And so in terms of affordances, it's the children's relationship to the pieces of the forest and how they perceive it and how they will act on those pieces. And so you'll see here, you know, we have beautiful fall foliage. And so that is a resource to us. And we have a set time where we do some focused math every time that we go outside with some of our classes. And the children are learning all different things by using those, basically nature as manipulatives. And then how they perceive those pieces afterwards goes into all these, a whole other realm. They become trading pieces, they become money, they become homes for animals. And so a focused learning time where they're experiencing any kind of loose part or any piece from nature to learn, and then the opportunity during a forest choice time to use those pieces how they will. Also seasonally, so thinking seasonally of what happens in my area in each season. This is where you start to become a naturalist without knowing it. So our staff at the Nature Center here, we are all naturalists and we're all nature immersion specialists as well. So it's something that is a great partnership with our schools that they kind of rely on us for. But by looking at seasons and looking at that change of time, which you're going to see if you're going out every single week, you and your students become naturalists together and are practicing inquiry all the time. So that snow in that picture is covering up a pretty steep hill with rocks on it. It's a bit of a cliff. The snow is very, very deep. It's probably 4 feet deep. In the springtime or in the fall when it's not covered with snow, the children can't climb on it. It's not safe enough. But with that deep snow, they are able to kind of push their edge a little bit, practice their gross motor skills, and climb up and down that. And then when the snow melts, there's all kinds of things to discover, like logs to crawl through.
Thank you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
So that concludes what we have to share with you. And now we have about 10 minutes left for questions. So we tried to address some of the ones that we heard in the saw in the discussion thread. So thank you to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. If we did not answer your question, please feel free to reach out to us directly or post it right now in the chat box. So yeah, if you have questions, if you see the little chat feature in your toolbar, you should see a window pop up where you can type in a question, and we will try to answer as many.
Outside.
We won't be able to get to them all most likely, but we will try to follow up with people if we don't get to your questions.
Okay, I love it. Always the first question is, what about the bathroom? It's always the first question. Okay, so the bathroom. We have a routine. We use the bathroom before we go outside, which seems obvious, right? It's also knowing who your students are, okay? So what are their biorhythms during the day? And that one photograph that you saw with the circle, and you saw kind of a lot of things that were set up and brought into the forest, that teacher that year had a lot of children in the afternoon that you needed to use the bathroom after lunch. So she and her husband built an outhouse that had a tussock in it. So it's kind of a hunting or ice fishing potty for adults. Plastic bag goes in it, rubber gloves, all of that, and children can use the bathroom, and then that gets, children throw dried leaves or sawdust on top of it, and then that gets disposed of. That's one solution. We have a couple other schools where we use parks where there are bathrooms there. So if you have more questions about that, please email me, because there's a lot of different approaches. I don't know, Natalie, if you want to add to that.
I mean, I work with first graders, so they are generally pretty comfortable doing a nature pee, is what we call it. So, you know, they tell an adult that they need to go, and we help them find a nice enclosed space. And they are generally okay just going right there in the forest. But for some, they're not. And in that case, we're never too far away from a bathroom at my particular site. So we have enough grown-ups with us that if somebody really needs to go to a physical bathroom, they just walk the kid up there and then come back. But I'd say by and large, if you just kind of make it the norm that we're going to be out in the woods, then kids really do get on board with it for the most part. Not everyone is comfortable with that, so that's definitely a personal decision, but that's what we do in my class. Yeah, so I see a question about how to pay for this type of program. I mean, in my experience, there aren't really that many costs associated with it, aside from maybe a few upfront costs of getting equipment and gear if you need it. And as Amy mentioned, you know, going to businesses for donations is where I would definitely suggest starting. A lot of businesses are really eager to support the community in this way, so that's a good option. If that doesn't work out, you know, thrift stores are another great place to find used clothing that is going to be the right thing for your kids. Donors Choose, GoFundMe, you know, these websites that allow you to post a specific project, those are also good options. Amy, I don't know if you want to share a little more.
Yeah. Just because our work is a little bit different. So schools hire us to help them start these programs. And in the beginning, what we did as a nature center, this is where you can build an alliance with a local environmental education center, if you have one, is that we have resources for receiving grants. So what I did in the early years of this work was I would write grants. People are willing to give money away so that children will connect with nature. We all see children staring at screens. We see the repercussions. We know that nature is good for us and helps us feel better. So it's not a hard sell. And so what I would do is I would write grants to the resources that we had here at the Nature Center. And I would say, one year I got a grant for $15,000. So then I split it 3 ways to 3 different schools, and I offered them each $5,000. And we created, I mean, basically what we do is in-house professional development with our teachers. And so they had a $5,000 program. Some of them were able to add a little bit more money on. Now, I would say almost all of our schools, I think except for 2, now write this into their budget to pay us to help them. So it's in their school budget to pay us to come and help them take their students outside. That's the shift that we've seen here in Vermont. The benefits have been big. The results in the classroom have been astounding, and schools are now paying for it. We also have parent fundraisers and teacher fundraisers as well. So I'm not afraid to ask for money. I feel really passionate about this work, and I feel like I know that it's really, really important, and the effect that it's had on our students here in Vermont. So don't be shy to build alliances with people who might be willing to support you financially.
Definitely. There's a question about how do we manage allergies. So my class has tons of food allergies and some environmental allergies as well. And we basically manage it the same way we do in the classroom. So we just make sure we have EpiPens, we have whatever medication the kids need. It's all in a bag. We just bring that with us. I mean, anytime we leave campus, but especially when we go to the forest, we have an allergy plan for our class, for the school, and for each kid, with really specific information about what they need. And we always make sure that we have multiple charged cell phones and or walkie-talkies with us anytime we go out. So if there was an emergency, we have the ability to contact 911 or whatever we would need. So it's honestly never been a problem, even though I've had, you know, probably 4 or 5 kids without severe allergies every year. And I found that as long as we, you know, prepare ahead of time and make sure we bring the necessary materials, it hasn't been an issue. If you're talking more about environmental allergies like bee stings and things like that, you know, again, you want to just make sure you're prepared, have a first aid kit, have, you know, any information you can on what to do in all those situations. You want to make sure you do some first aid training ahead of time. But I think it's really just about preparing and letting the parents know what you've done to prepare, puts them at ease. So hopefully those things will go a long way towards addressing that. I think we probably have time for one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap up here just to be respectful of everyone's time. Amy, do you see a question that you want to tackle?
Yeah, I want to know about these kids who are moaning and groaning about being outside. I would love to spend some time with them. There's always going to be 1 or 2, and I think what I would say to that is what's happening with your outdoor time. We do a lot of consulting with the children. We ask them what their interests are. We watch what they are doing outside, and then we're held to still meeting standards outside and showing outcomes. And you are all teachers. You see what they're doing outside, and it doesn't take too much work to see where those NGSS standards come up, or vital results, or learning outcomes, anything like that. So I guess I would consult those children and find out what they want to do. I think also remember, it's okay for them to moan and groan. They're developing grit and building some resilience in that time as well. But maybe try some time consulting with them and see what they're interested in.
I totally second that as well. And often when they are moaning and groaning, they're actually having a good time, but they've just learned that reaction gets some attention. So I would caution you to just know that they may actually feel differently, and they're probably actually having a lot of fun. So I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all the questions, but I think, Max, if you can help make sure we save this conversation with all these questions, maybe Amy and I can answer them directly to people or in the ePro discussion group. I do want to make sure we answer all of these eventually, and I'm sorry we don't have more time. But we did want to just quickly end with a little bit of inspirations. Amy, do you want to share that one?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly where this quote came from, but it really resonated with me. We know that young children are always building concepts of who they are and what they're able to do in our classroom, in their homes, in their communities. And I just invite you to think of what is it that they have contact with, and what is the space that they're spending time in, so that they can learn about themselves, care for others, and ultimately care for their environment and care for the earth. So something to think about there. Nature's a great place to do that.
Yeah, lots of thinking happens there. Yeah. And so finally, we just wanted to leave you with our contact information. We definitely want to continue this conversation with all of you. We already have plans for a second webinar on March 21st. We hope you'll be able to join us for that. We will be continuing this conversation and going deeper into, what you actually do once you're outside. So please join us for that. And we were just talking this morning about maybe even a third webinar where we just answer people's questions.
Yes, I think so.
Yes. So we will continue the conversation for sure. But in the meantime, please do reach out to us. We're both pretty active on social media and really love engaging with other educators about this work. So thank you so much for your time tonight and for joining us. And we hope it was helpful for you. And keep up the great work wherever you are in this work. You're in exactly the right place, and just onward and upward.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
All right, and I'll leave this screen up for another minute or so, and then so if you want to take down the information, and then I will be ending the call. All right, have a great night, everybody.
Yep.